good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the planet. Today is a very special day for the editorial team of the book Cartografies Between Place, Time and Scale, which I represent at this event. Professor Marta Labastida, Professor Ruth Carlos, who are present here and whom I greet, and the architect and researcher Fernando Ferreira, who will also participate in moderating this session. First and foremost, I want to express my gratitude to the book's presenters, who graciously accepted our invitation to offer a reflection on it. Bruna Montuori, an urban researcher and designer, as well as Professor Maria Gola and Professor Susana Oliveira, deserve our special recognition. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank the Dean of the School of Architecture, Professor Paul Cruz, for being present also here, and Professor Jorge Correia, the Director of Lab 2PT, for his presence in this session. This lab, our lab, Landscapes, Heritage and Territory Laboratory, provided financial support for the publication of this book, which we gratefully acknowledge. I would also like to thank the students, now architects, who are here today and contributed to the book with the contents of their master thesis. And this is a book with many stories, many authors, many places, and a lot more time. It is my role and pleasure to begin by giving a brief overview of the book that I'm about to start. Cartografies Between Place, Time and Scale is a book integrated in the research project on Being With It, pedagogical experiences on territory, and as its global objective, the cataloging, reflection and dissemination of research in the area of city and territory conducted at the previous now labeled School of Architecture of the University of Minho, now with the new label School of Architecture, Art and Design. This book selects cartographies developed in integrated master thesis in this field of knowledge at the school. Contents were selected from 33 of a total of 101 theses developed in this area since 2009. These cartographies aim to reflect on forms and methods of representing contemporary places inside and outside the Portuguese territory, thus making visible the relational complexity that each of these places bears in its specificity. Following this premise, the publication is structured into 3 chapters that correlate the act of mapping with interdisciplinary concepts inherent to fieldwork, time, and scale. The first chapter, Between the Self and the Place, aims to explore the first transversal step to the process of mapping. The fieldwork is reflected in the body's approach to the place and in its connection with the various layers of the landscape. These layers are gradually uncovered in the journeys between the self and the place, extending themselves across time in a continuous process of going back and forth, of being simultaneously inside and outside the site. The body comes closer, it distances itself, clarifies, and consequently decides what to represent and how to do it. The second chapter, Between Time and Place, investigates how time is an essential tool both for understanding and mapping places through their history, processes, dynamics, rhythms, and temporal scales. This chapter is structured into 2 parts, lived time and linear time. Lived time aims to represent 2 types of lived experience: the experience of the self as author of the work, articulated with the various socio-spatial, political, environmental, and economic dynamics of the place, and the experience of the self as an inhabitant of the place, in the way that it takes possession of the collective place and how it uses, modifies, and interacts with it. On the other hand, the second part, linear time, makes visible the multiplicities of representation inherent to the temporal sequence inscribed in the place, by incorporating distinct and elastic diachronic scales, advocated both in the short and in the long times, and in the historical or geological time. Finally, the third chapter, Between Scale and Place, aims to map the infinite spatial, social, and political scales extant in the place, by unfolding visible and invisible relations. This chapter is also structured into two parts: scales of production and scales of intervention. The scales of production represent materials, artifacts, and ways of making, by trying to understand how they transform the place at various scales, in micro and macro, in proximity and at distance, in movements between different geographies. In this relational complex network, multiple spaces and communities are involved and transfigurated. The scales of intervention intend to demonstrate the anticipated imagery for the project place maps to various spatial, temporal, and productive scales. Flexible scenarios for uncertain futures are anticipated. Space scales merge with social dimensions. Everything that has been learned is incorporated into the complexity of connections between scale, time, and the self with the place. Thank you.
My name is Fernando. I'm a PhD candidate at the Bartlett School of Architecture at UCL in London. And I'm also co-editor of the book with Professors Cidália, Marta, and Ruth. Today, we are going to have here three invited presenters. We welcome Bruna Montuori from School of Architecture of Royal College of Art in London, Maria Gola from Cornell University, and Susana Oliveira from Faculty of Fine Arts of Lisbon University. I would like to thank the generosity of the three presenters for being here today and for accepting also reviewing the book.
I didn't prepare any visual materials, but I think if the book is downloadable, people can enjoy the part that I'm talking about. It's the drawings, the fieldwork. So in Berlin, childhood around 1900s, a book unpublished during his lifetime, the philosopher Walter Benjamin proposed that to really know a place, although he actually wrote about a city, it's necessary to get lost in it. In its letter, he wrote in one fragment, and quote, "Not to find one's way around a city does not mean much, but to lose one's way in a city as one loses one's way in a forest requires some schooling," end of quote. And I was wondering about this word schooling, and I was thinking about, because this work is a result of several master's theses and research, so it's also a proof of schooling, in a way. So likewise, Rebecca Solnit, in her book, A Field Guide to Getting Lost, picked on the clues from Benjamin and wrote, quote, "Getting lost was not a matter of geography so much as identity, a passionate desire, even an urgent need, to become no one and anyone, to shake off the shackles that remind you who you are, who others think you are," end of quote. Yet, unlike Solnit and ourselves, Benjamin belonged to a time where there was no GPS and perhaps not even tourist or commercial maps. Still less were the contemporary obsessions with knowing everything and always being prepared beforehand. The best times to visit this or that, to get cheaper tickets or online information, whether or not it will rain, or if are public transports in a given location, and so on. Instead, Benjamin believed in vagrancy and spontaneity. He trusted in surprise, and he knew that frequently knowledge and experience arise with the unexpected. So why not to endure a bit on that spirit? Why don't we more often exchange a piece of immediacy and the desire to control and disseminate, to discover the wanderer's amazement and the unexpected? The question is perhaps even more elemental. Are we willing to travel this way based on the premise that we need to lose ourselves in order to find ourselves? As Benjamin continues on this schooling, this training on getting lost is for him, quote, an art to acquire rather late in life. It fulfilled the dream of which the first traces were labyrinths on the blotting papers in my school notebooks, end of quote. The cartographies on this book are, at first, for a non-expert, quite cryptic and labyrinthic. But as we peep into the pages, they grow to be eloquent illustrations of this Benjaminian process of getting lost, by putting in place, in blotted papers, not only the keys of that particular type of personal journey, to get lost, to discover, to collect, to connect, and to remember, but also to heighten the moments of intensive and deep attention to the landscape. While looking at the pages and images of this fieldwork chapter, built with lines and stains, words and pictures, musical notations, delicate red and sinuous dashed lines, views from the sky or almost touching the ground, with textures and minor hints and stories, one slowly rediscovers and replicates that wandering process in each of these maps. The absence of captions or further information on the pages, besides the one contained on each image, forces us to experience the trying to rewalk the same paths, to imagine the stops and the pace of the footsteps, to restage the viewpoints and the visual clues. Insomuch that the drawing that we now see is already a virtual palimpsest, our imagined representation of a reenacted experience of the wanderer over the representation of the landscape here reproduced on the pages of the book. So perhaps the personal imagined experience of another person's experience that this book presents by means of a map representation becomes, through all these drawings, a true rediscovery, a moment of invention, which is the most thrilling possibility contained in this book part of fieldwork. Indeed, cartographies between place, time, and scale is highly relevant as an apology of landscape wanderlust, as a study process, as a drawing process, as a defense of a practice slowly excised by our era's anxiety to produce. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It is a real pleasure to be with you today. I could not resist when Marta Labastida invited me to be part of this wonderful celebration. I think every time a book is published, it is a celebration of the discipline and the related fields. I would like to say that I have gone through the book many times while I'm teaching studio this semester in a very different landscape, the landscape of upstate New York, which is almost like a Dutch landscape, very watery, very humid, full of wetlands and of swamps and marshlands and fallow forests. And not so much to do with New York City, which is like the tip, of that state. And I don't know, this is more like not so much a rationalized impression about the book, which I'm enjoying and I will enjoy. And when I receive it, I will share it with my students. But I feel that my reading is definitely framed through my years in Barcelona, where I had the opportunity to meet my colleague and friend Marta Labastida and work together for many years. So I have this first impression about the book that celebrates the concrete, and somehow the multiple and rich approaches could be inscribed, in my understanding, in a very contemporary, but still in a within a tradition of morphology. And I call it an expanded morphology, somehow echoing what others have said of different fields. So I will go through my notes a little bit quickly, knowing that I have 10 minutes, and unfortunately I will have to leave you 5 minutes before 2 or 7 in your time, because my studio review is starting. But I always understand representation as a process of constant inquiry that aims to contribute to new language, in this case, architectural or territorial or landscape knowledge. And since I have been in the States, I have this impression that theory advances very quickly using languages that are complementary to design. There are many books written, especially I think in the Anglo-Saxon world, while drawing is the design's vehicular language, and is the center of design. Everything important happens in this realm. This is why I'm so excited by this invaluable effort. And so these open-ended questions that we often read in important theoretical texts that translate and convey, and are based on philosophical underpinnings, are very hard to show in drawing. And past summer I was reading an interview in El País, if I'm correct, of the Hebrew historian Harari, and he was talking about his illustrated novel of the history of Homo sapiens, titled Sapiens. And he was saying, when one writes in a text, humans discovered how to lit fire, you just say, but when you draw an image of a prehistoric human using fire, you have to make many difficult decisions. Is this human a man or a woman, young or old, white or black? It is not possible to draw a generic human without gender, not age, skin, and color. And this is why I think I share with this wonderful group of scholars, and I try to convey to my students. I also think that this book, and I will go after that to the idea of time, is a homage to the concrete. And another philosopher whom I am reading a lot, Graham Harman, in his book Object-Oriented Ontology and a Theory of Everything, says that reality is the rock that we anchor our ships, and our perception and interpretation for survival. However elusive this reality may be, or always radically different from our formulation of it, we still have to somehow try to understand it. He's very persistent in that idea that we can never approach it totally. We can never, but it's a journey which needs efforts, persistence, and multiple paths together. He actually talks about a withdrawal or withholding of things from direct access. And this is the central piece of object-oriented ontology. And the cartographies I have been looking these days and profoundly enjoying the richness and complexity, somehow became a great exemplification of the need to approach reality indirectly, but in a concrete way. And time is a great aspect of leveraging the subjective dimension of reality. So in landscape, and I will talk using this term because I have been somehow centering all my scholarship in the importance of that term and that discipline, but we can expand it to physical space. is nothing but time most of the time. No, the processes, growth, changes of color, performance, and in general, all the changes and their effects and atmospheres are radically important, no, to the definition of space. And somehow they feel more important, no, than the space itself. Several scholars, among them James Corner, but others, had talked about a commonly acknowledged aspect, no, of the temporality of landscape, and to the fact the landscape is a living biome, no, subject to flux and change by natural processes operating over time. But weather, for example, continuously transforms the structure and pattern of the shifting landscapes. And the same landscape may be experienced in different ways, you know, when it is flooded or in fog or in snow and fire and differently, you know, and less extreme moments. However, my question is, which time is more important? No, is the time of permanences or the time of exceptions, who often, at least in my context, a current context, end up being understood as risk, no, especially in an area of global warming. The latter, this understanding of time, has been a major drive for cartographies in the US, and I understand all over the world, no? And there is a proliferation of descriptions almost in every studio or in every thesis of process-driven and performative times, and somehow they're more related to what you propose in the book, like linear time, no, in the past, the present, as well as projections of future, talking about geological, cultural, and histories of the site. And I think that the sequence of moments are like a big decision, and they are intentional and very related, let's say, to design thinking and decision making. However, it feels like either there is some controversy, at least in my mind, about this idea of linear time. No, stories might be neglected, or often when there is no data about those. And at the same time, they somehow, these descriptions of linear time might feel like, you know, there is somehow kind of clear, rational understanding, no, of that experience. So in a mode of ending, like in the last part of my contribution here, I would like to share with you my personal interest in the live time, no, as you express it here, which I find a very interesting, general, no, open-ended, but rich and dense understanding of time, because in any case, time is a perception, and the implications of the latter are truly structural, no, in our understanding of it. I think that this idea of exploring the duration of the experience and how it registers in space, the surrealistic and unfolding flow of befores and afters, is very important, no? And I think it's, although it might seem an endeavor that, you know, is time consuming, and it doesn't really end into some tangible results, it's a great indirect way, no, to approach this reality. And as if landscape cannot spatially be reduced to a single point, it cannot be frozen, no, as a single moment in time. I will just refer Merleau-Ponty, where he identified, no, that there are no events without them to experience them, and just bringing this subject, no, into the drawings, it somehow reminds us all the time of the importance, no, of the relativity of our setting of data. Then live time is always registered through movement, no, walking, which is one of my favorite ways, especially because it relates to the work that you have been doing with field work, although of course biking and driving, you know, has been always part of it. And that relates to some readings I have been doing the last years and trying to reflect, no, on my own work through that. And I will mention Tim Ingalls' writing in his book of A Brief History of the Line, he says that for the Inuit population, as soon as a person moves, he becomes a line to hunt for an animal or to find another human being who might be lost. So you lay on one line of tracks through the expanse and looking for signs of another line that might lead you to your quarry. You know? That's for them, the entire country is perceived as a mass of interweaving lines rather than a continuous surface. And I really like this note because I see that in many of the drawings, that relate to time and others, in the end, we have a mesh of different available perceptions that, intersect or, are interweaved. So I have been looking, in this book as a mesh of lines, real or created, physical or abstract. And when I close my eyes, the image, that comes first is this kind of sectional, somehow real or projected or sensed particular traces of the landscapes that we are working with. And I will stop here.
It's an honor to be here, and also thank you for sharing the space with our guests, Susanna and Maria as well. Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here today. As Fernando already introduced me, I am researching the work of an organization based in Rio, which is located in a compound of 16 informal settlements, favelas, and a place where cartography has a very different meaning. So looking at this book was a really amazing exercise. First of all, I just want to say what a beautiful work you have done, what a breadth of an effort of gathering all of these drawings and materials throughout time. I imagine it has been really hard for you to choose which ones should come and which were more better in each place. The part that was concerning my review, which I was really glad to look at, was the relationship between cartography and scale. And the focus on representing scale, it appears in different forms and different and across different perspectives. And what I found really interesting is I will begin, first of all, describing my relationship with cartography and scale before I jump into the book, because I'm not originally an architect. I am a product designer who migrated into architecture. And in my own work, I observed scale from the perspective of the body, directly of interactions and how people relate to each other and with things, with non-humans and objects. And in my own work, one of the first authors that I approached was Michel de Certeau, who would look and discuss the scale of looking at the city from a gaze from above. And I always question myself, what is underneath this scale from above? What can we see? What is hidden? What is not coming up, right? And by looking at the book, we see two main scales that are approached. One is the scales of production, which review the relationships, the relations between nature and resources, the technologies for manipulation and extraction, the displacement of artifacts, data, goods, and supplies, the flow of materials and industrial processes, the logistics and consumption that will feed the relations and structures of power and capital accumulation, the displacement of marble, iron, cast, coal, fish, and other resources that we understand as resources, but are part of what we understand as nature. And at the same time, we deal with another set of scales, which are the scales of intervention, which open space to a dimension that is imaginary, that imagined, that is from imagination of what could have been, of what could be, what we could experiment, what could be reconfigured, disassembled, and even remounted, reconstructed, rebuilt. And through these scales, we open a space to observe what are the plural lenses behind cartographies, and what are the occasions which certain perspectives are overlooked, shedding light to other forms of fabulating landscapes, spaces, places, rethinking systems, labor and social relations, forms of affection, embodied subjectivities, and which show us that cartography is a choice of perspective and a way to narrate history, bringing into evidence other forms of relating to the space. And through both of these cartographies, which are brilliantly depicted in different drawings according to different scales, in which when we look to production, we'll see the different forms in which the intersection between politics and economics, they come together and they will create what we understand as the globalized world, what could have been and what we could see as intervention, what could be. And in these approaches and methods of thinking about cartography, we can think of what is this ethics, what we mean about a political choice when we decide to position ourselves as cartographers and architecture practitioners, and being reflexive about our own practice. What this ethics of choosing who are we portraying and with, how we dialogue with these different voices, and how do we understand what representation means in an area of muting, silencing, erasure, exclusion. So what happens when to scales when we map the invisible, the unmapped, the excluded? And bringing my own perspective from the global south as a researcher from Brazil, and especially looking at Maré, which is this place that I have been researching for the past 8 years, perhaps. But not only Maré, which is in Rio, but also other places that are unmapped, that are not able to be mapped, such as refugee camps, other informal settlements, and other inhabiting worlds that are outside of the official accounts of representation. What happens when we do that those things? And one example is my own research in Maré, a place that has an incomplete cartography because of history and the ways that modernization took place in Rio de Janeiro, and how these excluded landscapes were not taken for granted or taken into account in the official forms of representation of cartography, and which are mapped by mainly through the local knowledges and situated knowledges based on that land. So what happens, I wondered, what are the methods, the technologies, the approaches that will come based on lived experiences, technologies based on ancestral knowledges, and other forms of understanding life? So then I invite you to move from cartography as a colonial instrument, which Boaventura de Souza Santos versed so well, and invite you to look at counter cartographies, which appeared in so many layers of this book. How do we understand cartography from a perspective that gives visibility to these historical accounts that have been excluded, that go in the opposite direction of muting and erasing voices? What other scales could come forward, I wonder? So in that sense, what I found extremely amazing about this book is the way that these counter cartographies, they can be a tool to change systems of inequality and seeking ways to promote autonomy, to strengthen communities, leaderships, organizations that are already working collectively to promote other imaginaries of place from a perspective on the ground of who is in fact experiencing space. So just to conclude my my review, I just want to invite you to think of these other technologies of mapping, of looking at this, looking at place, and that will challenge the scales that we know and will open space for ancestral, intergenerational, and quoting Faranak Miraftab, an urban scholar in the US, what other methods can come up to see the future as a place of struggle for justice, how cartography could work in that sense. And I think the book brings a few insights in that sense for us to rethink our position as architectural cartographers. Thank you.